All right, dear, I'll let you go. I pulled the phone away from my ear and placed it on my pocket. I had just finished a long day at the office. It was dark and I had the blinds drawn to keep the neighbors from peeping on me. I went over to the kitchen and checked the refrigerator to see what was lying around. I looked in. Butter, eggs, the casserole my mother had made had gone bad. There was some beer left over from the day before. I tossed out the old casserole. It smelled like old feet. I then cracked open a fresh beer to help me relax my muscles. I gave up on something fancy and just opened a pack of instant noodles. I separated the packet of seasoning from the packaging. Beef flavor was my favorite. I then pulled out a small pot with a handle and filled it about halfway from the top. While that was going, I turned on the television to some jazz. The burner lit up with the flame, and I put the pot over it. I threw in some salt to help it heat up faster. I was planning on surprising my girlfriend this weekend and maybe a dinner at a fancy restaurant. Their relationship was going through a tough time. I thought to try and bond with her over a steak, wine, and candlelight. It was then that I heard it. Zzz, zzz. I jumped back a little in surprise. I checked my pocket. My phone said Mom, so I answered it. Oh, hey, it's so good to hear from you, I said. When are you coming to visit? My mother questioned. This time around Thanksgiving, I said. It's been so lonely with your father gone and your brother in college, she cried. Yeah, I miss Dad a lot. How's the little runt doing? Passing all his classes? I interrogated. Yes, an A plus in all of his engineering classes, a regular Einstein, my mother laughed. Maybe I'll come visit you over the weekend, I said. All right, Mom, I'll let you go, I finished off. Okay, dear, take care, she replied. It was then that I heard the slightest knock on one of my walls. I turned down the volume on the TV and said, Sorry, Mr. Flugelman, I'll keep the noise down. The walls in the apartment were near paper thin. It was hard to have a private life. Luckily, my girlfriend had her own apartment with thicker walls, so we could make as much noise as we wanted. I had turned the volume down. I then changed the channel to my favorite program, Time to Get Feedback, a show about relationships on the rocks and their breakups and their makeups. My mind started to wander as I tried to decompress myself. I went over to the fridge and pulled out a beer. It was to unwind a little. As I opened the top, foam burst from the opening. I pressed my lips against the foam and tasted the slight sting before the calming numbness started to set in. I watched my program. I noticed that there was more static than usual. I fumbled with the remote. I played with different options to try and fix the screen. It was then that I saw a figure flash across it. It must have been a trick of the eye. I got another call. Zzz. Again, I checked caller ID and it flashed bro in big gray letters. I didn't really want to talk to him because I was dead tired, but maybe he was trying to follow from the chat with Mom, and so I decided to answer. Hey bro, what's up? I said, smiling. Hey, I haven't been able to contact you, my brother whined. What do you mean? I said. Maybe you were on silent? I've been trying to call you on and off, my brother worried. Well, I did have to turn off my buzzer for the meeting today. Hold on, let me get something, I replied. I still had him on the phone, but I went over to the kitchen to grab another beer. They were having a local Oktoberfest in the area, and I had grabbed a case for the season. I cracked it open and nursed the bottle as I held the phone up to my ear to continue. Anyway, I have you now. I wanted to call you about the gift from Mom, he said. Well, you know we're coming to the end of the year. What are you going to get Mom, he said. I was thinking a nice blue bird blanket. Say that 3 times fast, I laughed. How about your gal pal, my brother joked. I paused for a moment. Maybe a nice bottle of anise. She likes to smell good for work, I replied. Yeah, that sounds cool, my brother replied. She said she was feeling a little sick. All right, bro, I have to head to class. Thanks for the tip, he said. He hung up. I went back to whatever I was doing, which was nothing. My eyes started to droop as my body was getting ready to pass out. I had to resist the urge to fall asleep. I used all my strength to get off the couch. I walked along the hallway to the bathroom. I turned on the lights. I went over to the sink. As I was brushing my teeth, I went down to rinse my mouth. When I got up, I saw my sister staring back at me. She didn't say anything. Her skin was purple like a bruise. Her teeth were bone white. Her eyes pierced into me like daggers. I jumped back from the counter. I yelped and turned the lights off and on again, and she was gone. I must be going crazy, I thought to myself. I was going to run out the door, but then I thought that people would think I was crazy. Then the thought of Stephanie flashed through my mind. I went back to the couch, sat down, and gave her a call. I remember the day I met her, a young Latina in college. She was short and brown with a fiery temper. I loved that she had been headstrong and independent. She also had a habit of getting on my nerves. She just had to complain about everything. Every once in a while, I had to put her in her place, and once in a blue moon, she had to learn her lesson. The dial tone buzzed for a good minute before I got the "Hey!" "Hey," I started to say back. "This is Steph. Please leave your message at the beep." My heart sank, and then dread started to set in when I realized I couldn't reach her. I sat there and wondered what my next step should be. I thought about calling the police, but didn't want the embarrassment of Stephanie yelling at me for overreacting to a missed call. It was then that I heard a sound. At first, it was like a whisper. "Hey! Hey, you!" it said. I couldn't find the source of the sound, so I cranked my neck with my head like a radar to intercept the incoming signal. The sound was loud enough that it was close, but it seemed to come from a smaller creature that made me think it wasn't at the door. "Come help me," the voice cried. "Where are you?" I whispered back. "I'm up here in the vent," the voice laughed. I went over to the vent and peeked at it from the edge of the stove. "You have to remove the cover, silly," the voice replied. I went to a supply drawer that was near the kitchen, couch combo. I pulled out the Phillips head and got to work. I unscrewed the cover to the vent. I paused for a moment. I drew my head close to the opening and placed my hand square on the surface of the porcelain stove. I moved my head ever so closely to the opening. It was then that the face of Stephanie peeked from the opening. I stood and watched, shocked by her face. It was frozen in an aggressive grin. Her arms ripped from the impossible opening and grabbed my face towards the vent. She started to laugh maniacally. "If you leave, you'll die. If you leave, you'll die," she said. I smelled beef cooking. My hands started to burn. I looked down and realized the burners had been on full blast. There was no sensation in my hands. I pulled away from the burners and gripped Stephanie's arms to break free from her grasp. "Go ahead and leave, boy. See what happens," she laughed maniacally. "What did I do to you?" I cried. "You know what you did," she shouted back. "No, I don't," I yelled back. It was then that she disappeared through the vent. I went over to the couch to check out my hands. I saw that they were completely fine. I looked back at the vent, and it was the grill that was still placed back properly, like nothing had happened. I must have been losing my mind. My first instinct was to go for the door. I ran as fast as I could. I reached out for the handle. My hand sat there shaking on the bare metal. My spider sense was tingling. Before I opened the door, I looked through the peephole. Outside was a figure. Its skin was a pale gray like death. Its hair was straight and wiry. A large brim hat covered the top part of the face. It was covered in a long black dress, although its arms were exposed and bony. It could have been mistaken for my grandmother going to church, if it did not have a hideous smile. The grin stretched from ear to ear, almost like a Glasgow smile. "I can smell you in there," said the thing. "I can smell you in here," I yelled back. "You need to pay for what you've done." "Do you take cash or credit?" I yelled back. The door started to shake as the creature started to pound on it. All I could do was stumble back from the door. I thought about jumping out the window, but it was all the way up on the third floor. Maybe I could make the fall, maybe I wouldn't. In an instant, the shaking stopped. I did not have the courage to look through the peephole again. Slowly, I placed my ear against the door. I could hear the thing rasping and wheezing as I stood by the door. Zzz, zzz. I flinched a little as I heard the sound of my phone going off. I had left it on the table near the couch, so I ran back to see who it was. "Antonio, are you there?" gasped my mom. "Yeah, I'm here. What's wrong?" I stammered back. "Have you seen the news?" my mother replied. "No, what's the matter?" I said. "It's Stephanie. She's dead," my mother cried. "No. How do you know?" I said. I started to shake. "Turn on Channel 7, my mother replied. I dropped the phone on the table, grabbed the remote, and switched to the local news. It looked like a rerun of the morning segment by the morning light still visible from the window outside. "In recent news, Stephanie Rodriguez was found dead in her apartment early this morning in Diamond Rock County. Police investigators have not released an official statement as of today. If you have any information, please contact the police immediately. Now on to our next story. I went back to the phone. Are you there? I asked. We know what you've done, the creature hissed. I need to go, Mom. Love you, I said. Tony? Tony, I heard my mother say. I sat there for a moment. I had lost the love of my life. I started to sink into myself. I went over to the couch and sat down. I started to sink into the material. The weight of my sorrow weighed me down. My mind started to race as I had no words to say. My head started to pound blood and adrenaline as it entered into my system. I wanted to calm my nerves from the stress. I went over to the fridge and grabbed an Imperial Stout, Brown Bear. The dark coffee flavor was bitter and not to my liking. However, the numbing effect was quick and effective. My mood and my body started to swing as I thought about how I would never see Stephanie again. It wasn't fair. I downed the first bottle and went for a second one. I went back to the couch and threw the phone on the floor. A corner chunk of the frame broke off. I felt like I was losing my mind. I sat there. I felt like a separate being watching my body as a spectator. I had no words to speak. There was only time. Everything started to slow down as adrenaline flooded my system. There's no way in hell that anyone is going to believe what I saw. And even worse, they might suspect me of hurting Stephanie. Inside, I screamed as to not awaken Mr. Flugelman. I ran over to the sink. My apartment was compact by nature, and so it only took me a heartbeat to get where I was going. I thought for a moment. I grabbed a kitchen knife from its base. I screamed a deep and silent cry from within myself. No one heard a sound. I looked at the blade. It was made pristine and pre-cut, as were most products here in the States. I raised the blade closer to me. And then I thought about the love I still had for Stephanie and all the people who relied on my work. The blade fell from my hand. It was then that I got another call. What's up? I quipped. Sup, big boy? My brother replied. Dude, what? I responded back. Mom is losing her shit over the news. Oh no, I said. Burn in hell, the creature responded. I gotta go, I replied back. There I was again in the darkness. Day had turned to night. I was alone. I looked at my phone again. The time said 10:05 p.m. It was then that I heard a tapping at the window, a rapping on the pane. At first it was soft, but the knock became louder and louder, that I was surprised the window itself didn't break. I had no courage left in me to fight back. My hand reached out again for a wand to peek through the blinds. As the blades turned, I was shocked. There was a large eye, maybe the size of a giant squid, staring back at me. I stared at the amazed sight. It floated there glistening and yellow, pale almost like a midnight moon. I grabbed the wand again and turned the blade shut. I went back to the front door. I could still hear breathing of something waiting for me. For all intents and purposes, I was boxed into my apartment. I could not leave, and I had no intention of jumping out the window, lest I be eaten by a giant fish creature. My only option was to head to bed. It was only Saturday. I had a whole day tomorrow to figure out what to do. First, I checked beneath the bed. There was nothing except for a pair of shoes and a few dust bunnies. I threw off my clothes, put on a pair of nightwear, and jumped into bed. I laid there in the darkness, my senses sharp at every creak and bump as it entered into my ears. I felt something clawing my legs. The problem was I didn't have an animal in the house. I felt like a spider climbing up my leg. It started to move up my chest all the way to my face. I felt a tight squeeze on my neck and my throat started to close. I did not scream as the air was cut from my mouth. It was then that I passed out. I had a dream in my mind's eye. I could feel a smear of color and sound. My emotions swam around me. I was in darkness. A dim light flooded where I stood. There was only nothingness until I saw her. She stood there before not saying a word. She looked at me with dead, sunken eyes, pleading me for forgiveness. In an instant, she reached out to grab me. Her hands wrapped around my neck until zzz, zzz. I was awoken by my phone. The number said unknown. I hesitated for a moment and picked up the call. Hello, who's this? I asked. Hello, is this Antonio? The voice replied. Yes, this is he, I responded back. My name is Dexter. I was a good friend of Stephanie's, he started to waver. Is that so? I said. Yes. She was a wonderful woman, Dexter replied back. You two must have been very close, I shot back. I just wanted to give my condolences for your loss, Dexter said. Thank you. Please don't call this number again, I responded. And with that, I hung up. I started crying, the phone still clutched in my hand. The screen was slightly cracked from earlier, and I realized it only had a 20% charge on the battery. I went looking for a charger. I had to play with the cord and the port for a bit out of habit, for it not charging properly. I went over to the door again. I checked through the peephole and saw nothing. I passed through into the bathroom, and once again I saw nothing in the glass. I reached out for the faucet and started the bathwater to take a shower. I pulled back the shower curtain, and there was Stephanie. She was pale and pallid, her hair in contrast with her skin, jet black, and with so many strands I lost count. Her bangs covered the upper portion of her face, but her mouth was still formed in a frown. The water ran down her body. She was naked and did not seem to be a vengeful spirit like she was before. I took off my clothes and got in with her. She said nothing, but stood there under the water. I wrapped my arms around her to comfort her. She was ice cold to the touch. There were bruises on her collarbone, and what looked like prints on her throat. They created a purple ring around her neck. I love you, I whispered in her ear. That Dexter is trouble, I said. She said nothing, but took my arm in hers. I turned off the faucet, I got out and started to dry myself off. I looked back and Stephanie was gone. I got dressed and stuck my hand out towards the door. I looked through the peephole once more and saw nothing. I was sick of living like a coward, and so I opened it. There was nothing in the hallway, both left and right. I took the stairs down. The material on the stairs was from a much older building than the new material. It smelled of old wood and dust. After a moment, I was on the first floor. I started to walk towards the entrance and still nothing. However, once I stepped outside, things had changed. The sky was purple, almost like during a sunset. There was a giant eye where the sun might have been, ever watching. I started to notice that people were not themselves. One man or thing came up to me. His body looked composed of parts of different animals, and a tentacle replaced his arm and hands. Hey there, want to help feed the kids during the summer? He asked. Yeah, sure, I said, pretending not to notice his grotesque features. Here, take a few for your friends, he laughed. I looked at the flyer. Try our new human bacon bits. They're fun for the whole family. There was a picture of a squid family with a bowl of what looked like flesh chunks smiling over a bowl of milk. The end is near, folks. Make sure to make the most of it, the creature yelled. I stared blankly at the flyer as to not draw attention to myself. I started to make my way towards the grocery store, which was just a short walk from my apartment. More and more people had turned into hideous creatures. For whatever reason, they didn't seem to notice me in my human form. It was then that I heard a noise. Ooh! I flinched for a moment as a patrol car sped down the main road. Inside there was a squid with a police cap. Looks like they got the police too, I thought. I made my way closer to the grocer's. Even the songs of the birds or whatever seemed garbled, as if they had bones in their throats. I entered into the grocery store that was situated at the bottom of an apartment building. It was filled with squid people and animals of different colors and sizes and shapes. I grabbed a basket and went over to the produce section for some meat. On the shelves were human brains, hands, and feet of various prices. It looked like they were having a sale on butt fat. I checked out a few. Most were wrapped in plastic to keep them fresh. I grabbed a few more items. The people inside, I couldn't really call them something like that, had pig heads and hooves in places of hands. One had a duck bill and huge bulgy eyes like a chihuahua's. These people were truly animals, and it made me sick to think that they were my neighbors. I ran over to the self-checkout, paid, and made my way back to my apartment. On the way back, I stopped by the same squid man. Hey man, thanks for all you do, he smiled. What a disgusting creature, I thought to myself. Hey man, spare a few chunks for a squid, he begged. Here, I got you, I said. I broke off some chunks of a hand and a foot and gave it to him. Thanks, mister, you're a real one, he said. I got back into the lobby and made my way into the elevator. Stephanie was waiting for me there. She turned to me and spoke. You did a good thing, Tony, she said. I know, I replied back. The elevator took us to the third floor. The doors opened. I walked out, but Stephanie did not follow me. I walked over to my apartment. I fumbled for my keys and opened the lock. I flipped the switch, and the room was bathed in light. There was no one, it was only me. I closed the door and walked over to the place the food on the counter. I got out a large kitchen knife that I had been preparing. It fell right through the bone, sharp and weighted. Hmm, I thought someone might have prepared the bits earlier. I clipped up all the fingers and toes from their base. I filled a big pot with water and threw the stubs of the hands and foot to simmer. I covered a pan in avocado oil because I was watching my weight. I kept my eye on the stubs and set them to medium heat. I threw some salt in for good measure and to help sterilize it. Maybe, or maybe it was just a ritual. I set the oil pan down and gave it a moment. I may have introduced too many as the pan started to spit oil back at me. Smoke started to rise. I turned down the heat and powered the vent fan. The smoke then started to die down. I then checked on the meat as it was already starting to boil. The tips of the giblets were starting to turn golden brown. I found a towel and dressed up a plate. I gently started to shift the niblets on the plate. I picked up one and gave it a bite. There was a satisfying crunch, just the way I liked it. I found a bowl and carefully lifted out the big chunks of meat with utensils into a large bowl. I grabbed another pinch of salt and started to sprinkle it on my prize. The flesh was tender, maybe a little undercooked. The red juices slathered and sloshed in my mouth, succulent morsels. I had a delightful meal between the two courses. I grabbed a Blood Moon Ale, a hearty Irish red, and drank one to calm my nerves. I then got a call. Zzz, zzz. Mom. What's up? I said. Antonio, is that you? Mom cried. Yes, Mother, it is, I replied. Oh, Tony, it's just awful. It's all over the news, she sobbed. Yes, Bro told me yesterday. Hold on, Mom, I said calmly. I turned the television on to some rock music. I then turned up the volume, waited, and listened. I heard a tap come from the wall. Sorry, Mr. Flugelman, I called out, and lowered the volume down a few levels to keep him from complaining again. I then went back to the phone. Sorry, Mom, are you there? I apologized. Aren't you worried? My mother whimpered. I got a call from a close friend of Stephanie's, I said. Oh? My mother paused. I do believe he was the last one to see Stephanie alive, I lied. Tony, you need. If this is true, you must contact the police immediately, she said slowly. I rolled a half niblet, maybe a pinky or middle toe around my mouth. I'll contact them in just a bit. No, Tony, now, she commanded. What's that, Ma? You're breaking up, I sneered, and I hung up the call. She had never been a fan of the relationship to begin with, and now she wanted to start barking orders about how I lived my life. I paused for a moment to compose myself. I thought to take my mind off the situation. I collected the used dishes and placed them back in the sink. I ran water and started to scrub. The work was peaceful and simple. It was then that one of the forks had slipped into the garbage disposal. I paused for a second to place the clean plates in a dry rack. I went back and looked at the drain of the sink. I started to reach for the fork. It was nearly at the bottom of the drain. I reached in, and the moisture of the drain felt awkward. It's then that I heard the sound before the sensation. Zzz! The drain turned on. I felt the fork cut into the edge of my flesh. My reflexes were quick, and I turned out my hand just in time from it being torn to shreds. I thought about what my mother had said. I grabbed my phone. I unlocked it, and there was a picture of Stephanie smiling from our trip to Guatemala some years back. We had gotten stuck in the city due to the summer rains. It had taken us nearly 5 hours to finally get out and onto Antigua. I thought it strange that she wanted to be alone during a once-in-a-lifetime trip. Then I remember catching her with some guy at the bar. It wasn't my fault I had to yank her out and teach her a lesson. I blinked back for a moment and scrolled through the call log and dialed the number that he had left on my phone. I pushed the real dial number. The phone rang and rang and rang, and my blood pressure began to increase with each passing moment. I could feel my heart thumping in my ears, and then I heard it. This is Dexter St. Jacques. Please leave a message. Hello, this is Antonio. We spoke earlier today. We need to talk. If you got a moment, my address is 111 Milky Way Drive, I said. Just at the last moment, I heard someone pick up the receiver. I knew and had seen the signs. Her going out late at night, the suspicious numbers appearing in her call log, the trip she took to San Francisco to visit her sister last summer. It was all too good to be true. I grew enraged in an instant, but kept my composure to not scare my prey. Hello, hello, someone said. Yes, I growled. I know where that is. Are you there? Yes, I replied, foaming. I'll be there in 30 minutes, he stammered. He hung up the call. I cleaned up my lunch and wrapped up the rest of the hand stump and the remaining giblets for later. I cleaned off a large kitchen knife. It was still sharp and fit nicely in my hand. I handed it under the front, secured it with my belt and waistband. The blade shifted a little, and I walked, and sweat started to pour over the surface. I tested it out, using a hoodie to cover it, and it worked. Although it bit into me, but the pain was comforting. It made me alive. It was then that Stephanie stood before me. I opened my arms to embrace her. She did not move, she just stood there. Her face was blank, and her stare was vast. There were no pupils or irises where her eyes should be. I felt her draw her close to me. I held her. I noticed that she was cold, stiff. I looked at her back. Her back was various colors of purple, like a bruised tree with rings. I tried to squeeze, and her body was rigid. She opened her mouth to let the air out of her body. She screamed a blood-curdling scream, and I couldn't take it. I threw her from me, and she landed on the floor. Her head cracked against the linoleum floor that was false wood, and then she vanished. I heard a sound at the door. I threw my head at the frame, my fingers patting the impact like a spider lunging at its prey. Who is it? I snapped. Pizza delivery boy, the man said. What? I said, startled. It's me, Dexter, the man said. Oh, please come in, I smiled. I unlatched the door slowly. I could feel my heart race as I heard the metal sliding away from the rest of in its position. I slowly opened the door a crack. There stood an Asian man about 5'5" in height. I thought I had been seeing things, but then I realized I had never actually met Dexter in person. Hello, are you Antonio? Dexter said. Yes, this is he, I replied. May I come in? He asked. Sure, come make yourself comfortable, I said. By the way he walked and his demeanor, I felt no anger towards him. I greeted him and let him step in as I made way. I pointed towards the couch and he made his way down the hallway to be seated. I noticed that he walked a little funny as he moved. He had sort of a small limp, or maybe one of his legs was shorter than the other. A few flaws that gave him character. Would you like a glass of water? I asked sweetly. Yes, I'm a bit dry, he replied. Hold on a sec, I said. I went over to the cupboard and pulled out a plastic cup. I went out to the fridge and pulled out a pitcher of blood. It was strange because he didn't seem fazed by its contents. Maybe he was actually a vampire. I poured out the liquid into a cup. It slowly fell into the vessel, as it had congealed a little bit from the temperature. I poured out a glass for myself and handed him his share. I raised my glass and offered a toast. To Stephanie, I cheered. To Stephanie, he saluted. We both drank down the fluid. I could feel the chunks slipping down my throat. It was thick, almost meaty in texture. My bloodlust had not been quenched, but at least Dexter and I were on an accord. I could see red lines of juice spilling from the sides of his mouth. It was clear in my mind's eye that something was going down. In many ways, we were same in spirit, if not in form. So how long did you know Stephanie? I asked. Oh, going on about 4 years, Dexter responded. How did you handle the virus? I asked. It was a shit show, he said. I smiled for a moment. In a lot of ways, I could have imagined Dexter and I as good friends. We looked nothing alike, but we definitely had similar personalities. And we certainly had good taste in women. I wonder if he was more of a finger or a toe man. We sat there and chatted about this for what felt like 15 minutes before I made up my mind about him, and that's when it happened. Reach for the sky, dirtbag, Dexter yelled. He had a Glock aimed at my center of mass. What? I cried. I know all about you and Stephanie, he cried. What? I know all about you and Stephanie, I yelled back. Don't play stupid with me. She told me everything, he growled. What do you think you know? I scoffed. I looked around in that moment for a way to escape. We were way too close to each other for anything too aggressive. This worthless pig had taken the love of my life away from me, and now was threatening me? It took all my strength to restrain myself from doing anything rash. If it were a contest of strength, I'm pretty sure I'd have him beat. I was almost 5 inches taller and about 60 pounds heavier. She told me about the abuse and your drinking, he sneered. Well, I know you've been sleeping with her, I said. And I know you're the reason she's dead, he ended. It was at that instant that I had made my decision. I used my weaker left hand to snatch his wrist away like a viper. He let off a round as if a survival instinct in vain. I reached up with my dominant hand and slashed upwards. I was lucky and sliced clear through the outer layers of his throat. He gurgled like a stuck pig. Boston faced his body away from mine to not get blood on me. We could have been good friends, I whispered. I guess the old saying was wrong about bringing a knife to a gunfight. I held on to him and cradled him in my arms. I could see the life fade from his eyes. The color drained from his face. I kissed his forehead as a sign of peace and commendation for a love long gone. My nerves were completely shot. The only thing I could think to do was to grab another beer. I went over, cracked it open, and downed it in one go. It was then that I heard a sound. Damn, Mr. Flugelman must have heard everything. I had only one choice. I dropped the knife and started to run. I ran out the door and past the hall and down the elevator. It only took a moment to send me down to the lobby. I paused for an instant at the insanity that must have still been outside, and then I walked out. The sun was still shining in the afternoon sky. The homeless man was still passing out flyers, although he had blonde hair and a pearly white smile instead of tentacles for I started to walk towards the train. My apartment sat across from one of those light rail stations, so I was able to commute easily around the city without a car. I did my best to keep a low profile. Luckily, there wasn't much blood on my clothing, only on my wrists, so I kept them hidden under the sleeves of my hoodie. There was a mixture of passengers spread out across the cars. The muscles in my neck started to tense as I saw the ticket monitors slowly making their way towards me. Had I remembered to pay my fare? What if they noticed my hands? My mind started to race. The passenger cars seemed to slow down as they inched ever closer to me. Two of the agents were busy with other clients, but the third had an eye on me and was heading my way. Before they could get there, there was an old woman in front of me. The old woman fumbled around for her ticket. It was then that the monitor got to me. Ticket, please, the agent said. Oh, I'm sorry, I must have forgotten it, I stammered. All right, sir, I'll need some ID, the agent responded. Oh, I don't think I have that either. I'm on vacation, I continued on. The monitor gave me an inquisitory look, but was too busy writing the citation. The cabin started to pull into the station. Just as the doors were opening, I bolted out of the cabin. I heard a quick, wait, but I was already making my way off the platform. Luckily, there was no security to follow up on me. I made my way to the opposite side of the platform. Stephanie's apartment was just a few blocks from the station. I had this sneaking suspicion I was being watched. I stooped down in front of the window to tie my shoe. I looked at the reflection in the pane. There was an outline of a woman. I did not have the chance to look back. My pace started to quicken as I headed towards the entrance. There was a security door. I slowed my pace and walked with pride. There was enough people who had seen me come to visit Stephanie that I wasn't a complete stranger. As I made my way to the door, a man was walking out. I smiled and pulled the keys out of my pocket. I was sure to place the thumb over the keyring like I had a fob for the door. He smiled back and held the door out for me, and I was in. I looked around the lobby. There were modern chairs and a fireplace, although the smoke suggested a heater. It was made of cement with the veneer of something modern. I had been in Stephanie's apartment before. If I had any luck, I might be able to hide out there before I made my next move. I went into the elevator. It was there that Stephanie appeared before me. I came to visit, I smiled. She was quiet. Look, I made a mistake. I had to get rid of him. He was getting between us, I said. She just looked at me and stared blank in a wide gaze that pierced into the very depths of my soul. The doors opened, and we both made our way down the hall. Again, by luck, there were no witnesses in the hall. It had only been a few days since the murder, and there was no tape across the door. Maybe the landlord had not gotten the chance to change the locks. My hands started to sweat as I fumbled for the keys. I pulled them out. My hands started to tremble as I tried the lock. Click! The sound of success. I slowly opened the door. It was near pitch black in the apartment. Light crept into the room as I fed my body into it. It was clear that no one was in the apartment. I was so tense my heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the vein in my neck was throbbing as I stepped through the hall. I had an idea. I ran over to the fridge on the other side of the room. I opened it up, and sure enough, there was still a six-pack of Blood Moon Ale I had left from my visit before. Looks like they forgot this little baby, I laughed. I grabbed two and looked around for an opener. I couldn't find one, so I placed the cap of one of them on my back molar, and with leverage cracked it open. Then I did the same thing with the other, and I offered it to Stephanie, and she took it. We both stood there for a moment enjoying our drinks. I left mine on the counter. The apartment smelt like it had been recently cleaned. Stephanie's furniture was still spread throughout the apartment. The pieces had been wrapped in packaging and would probably be donated within a week. There was a window with an ominous view of the mountains. They loomed over the city. It was though they might erupt at any moment. I made my way towards the living area. She had a white love seat that was faced opposite of the window. I sat down, and Stephanie spoke. "Looks like this is the end, sweetheart," I said. "Why did you hurt me?" Stephanie said. I was startled by her finally speaking to me. "What do you mean?" I whimpered. "You know what you did," she sobbed. "I meant to kill him," I growled. "Not him, me," she continued. "What?" I cried. "I will be with you forever," she cried. I saw that Stephanie started to struggle to breathe. I had my hands around her throat. The color and life faded away from her face. I gasped in horror at my actions. I pulled back and started to sob. My life was lost and my girlfriend was dead. I heard a knock at the door. "Police, open up," said a voice. My life was over. I looked over at my love and started to cry at the harm I had done to everyone. The pounding grew louder. I stared out over the skyline. There was only one way to make this right. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. I stretched out my hand and offered it to Stephanie. She pulled me with surprising force and brought my ear close to her mouth. "A life for a life," she whispered. I brought my lips to hers. I kissed her with the tenderness of death's embrace. At that moment, I heard the door slam open. "Police! Put your hands up!" the officer shouted. With Stephanie's hands still in mine, I lifted them up. I slowly turned to face the officers, but back towards the window. "Don't move!" the officer ordered. "It wasn't me, officer, I swear," I called out. "Antonio Andolini, you are being detained for unlawful trespass and the suspect to a number of murders over the course of this week. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" "A life for a life," I said, and fell back into the window. As I fell through the glass, it gave way. That moment felt like a lifetime, and as I reached closer to the end, I looked over to my side to get one last look at my love, and she was gone. I let a tear slide down my eye, as in an instant, it all went black. I felt a gasp of air as I woke up. I realized that I was still on the fourth floor. There was broken glass all over where the window used to be. I looked down and realized I was staring back at myself. I couldn't believe it. My first instinct was to run for beer. I went over to the fridge, but couldn't grab the handle. I started to freak out and tried to run for the door. As I got closer, Stephanie appeared before me. She started to laugh maniacally. I noticed in her hand was a large kitchen knife, much like the one I had at home. Then, Dexter appeared next to her, and they were both holding hands. I had nowhere to go, and all the time in the world. "Till rest do us part," they said in unison. That's when it hit me. I still had to pay for the second life.